Welcome to episode 1 of the Getting Well Again podcast. Today we are diving deep into my gut healing journey and how I went from struggling with long-standing gut symptoms to now thriving in my health and my life. So no matter where you are on your healing journey, I hope this episode inspires you and encourages you that full recovery is possible. Hey there, I'm Jessica Washington, a former gut health patient turned functional nutrition practitioner, and I am on a mission to help you finally say goodbye to stubborn stomach symptoms and reclaim your life with confidence. On the Getting Well Again podcast, we dive deep into the root causes of gut issues, sharing real strategies that actually work to help you feel like yourself again. Healing your stomach is about so much more than just protocols. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into this journey to lasting gut health together. Well, hi, I have a podcast. Honestly, this feels so surreal right now. Having a podcast has been a dream of mine for so long. Like, since I first started binge listening to them when my gut issues started, probably all the way back in 2014. So 10 years later, here we are. So if I'm extra excited for the first few episodes, you'll know why. I'm just living a dream over here. So I appreciate you for being here and for doing it with me. But if we haven't met, hey, I'm Jess. I am a wife of over 10 years now, a mom of 2 small boys. They are 3 and 5 and so much fun. And I am also a functional nutrition practitioner who specializes in helping people with stomach symptoms and H. pylori feel better. So I really wanted to start off this first episode going deep into my own gut healing journey. And so this journey obviously was a huge part of my life. It brought me to where I am now, both like personally with my health and professionally. I would not be a functional practitioner if I never got sick and needed to dive into my own health. And so this journey also really helps to inform everything I do as a practitioner with my clients, and I figured it would be a good place to start for the first podcast episode. So let's dive into it. It might be a little lengthy, but get cozy, grab a drink. Here we go. So I guess really it's interesting looking back, like the very beginning of my gut health issues, which I didn't even think were issues at the time. I just thought that's how I was. They started in high school, and I would always remember needing to curl up into a fetal position on the couch in a little ball every so often because I had stomach cramps. Like my stomach would hurt and I needed to lay down. And actually, looking back, what I thought were stomach cramps, now that I know the anatomy of the GI tract, they were actually intestine cramps. So they were a little bit lower than your stomach. So I would just have intermittent bouts of intestinal pain and cramping and would just have to lay down for a bit and drink some tummy time tea, and that made it better. And that's just how I was. And then I went away to college, and I remember my mom packed me this little first aid kit, and inside was some tummy time tea. So looking back, those stomach pains were definitely a big part of my life. And then freshman year of college, everything was fine. I don't even distinctly remember having cramps or GI pain, so I thought all was well until I went to Vietnam on a mission trip the summer after my freshman year. And so this was, looking back, the official beginning of my years-long digestive collapse for a few reasons. So first, I was taking an antibiotic long-term. So malaria is fairly prevalent in Vietnam, and my doctor recommended before I go over there that I take a specific antibiotic prior to, during, and after traveling to help prevent me from getting malaria if I got bit by a mosquito that was carrying the disease. And so I was probably on this antibiotic for over a month, which I didn't know at the time, but definitely know now that antibiotic use wipes out all of the beneficial bacteria in your gut, leaving you susceptible to a whole bunch of issues. So being on this antibiotic for a long time was definitely a contributing factor to all of my digestive issues that were about to occur, although I don't think it played the starring role. It wasn't like the only thing that caused these issues. What did play a starring role was my choice to drink the local tap water while I was in Vietnam. And this was something I knew not to do. Everyone said, before you go over there, don't drink the water. Bring your own bottle with a filter, get bottled water, all the things. But what they didn't tell me was how good those street vendor smoothies were. So the group and I probably got like 3 or 4 of them in the time that we were there, and they were so good. Like 100% don't regret that decision. But drinking those smoothies that were likely made with the local tap water and were probably contaminated with, a host of bad bacteria, parasites, who else knows what, was probably the big trigger that set my digestion off balance for good. Like, I was wiping out my good bacteria with the antibiotic, was introducing all of these foreign, unknown, potentially pathogenic bacteria. It was a hot mess. So I was mostly fine while I was on the trip, but I do remember having some traveler's diarrhea, which wasn't fun on the way back home. But I survived. It eventually went away. But when I got back home and I tried to recover from the jet lag and all the traveling, I found that I just wasn't recovering. Like, I was so fatigued, didn't really have the energy to get off the couch. I could no longer eat dairy without getting severely bloated and sick. Like, ice cream was my jam before I went over. And then when I came back and tried to eat my same bowl of ice cream, I just could not do it. I felt so sick. And so eventually I recovered a little bit, felt better, but it definitely took longer than I expected, so that was unusual for me. Then I went back to school for my sophomore year, and it was probably halfway through the school year that things started to get really bad again. I remember just getting so bloated after eating, like pregnant level bloated, like feeling so sick, more severe bloating than I had ever had. Just feeling my heart racing after meals, and even sometimes when I was just sitting in class, like I felt like there was just something wrong. And I distinctly remember one time I had to leave in the middle of class to go to the bathroom and lay down on the floor because my heart was racing so much. I felt like I was going to pass out. I was just not feeling well. So needless to say, my sophomore year was a tough one for me. I remember my parents came to pick me up and were shocked at how much weight I had lost. I was not doing good. So thankfully, that summer, my mom was able to take me to a GI doctor when I got home. And man, so grateful for this doctor because, I had no family history of anything GI related, nothing. But she didn't just dismiss me and say, oh, you probably have IBS or here's some medicine. She actually ordered me some blood work. And just as she was about to walk out the door, she decided to add on a celiac panel just to be safe, which I don't know how she thought of that. I had no family history of celiac. My symptoms weren't traditional celiac, but so thankful she did. And so if you're not familiar with celiac disease, it is an autoimmune condition where your body mounts an inappropriate immune response whenever you eat gluten. And so that immune response then attacks the villi in your small intestine. They're little like finger-like projections. And then when you eat gluten, your body attacks them and blunts them so that you can no longer absorb nutrients and calories from food. And so celiac, again, a genetic condition, and without any family history, we were pretty skeptical that that was the issue, but we were like, sure, let's test for it. And so she also recommended that I start taking a probiotic, which I had not been doing. And actually that helped a ton, right? Because if you remember my long-term stint on that antibiotic about a year prior to, my beneficial bacteria were probably pretty wiped out. So it makes sense that a probiotic would help me feel better with all those beneficial bacteria coming back into my gut. My gut was probably like, thank you, finally, you're helping me out. And so that probiotic took away a lot of my bloating, and I remember that summer was definitely feeling a lot better. However, I had so many mouth sores, which I think they're called canker sores, just like on like the bottom of my cheeks and lips on the inside. And I remember that summer having like 1 or 2 at all times, which was so strange because I had never had them before, but I really didn't think too much about it because like gut-wise, bloating, I was feeling much better. So I returned to college then for my junior year, and literally the day before the class started, I got a call from my GI doctor with the results of my blood work, and I was positive for celiac disease. Who would have thought? And looking back, those canker sores were actually a big red flag symptom of celiac. They're just, for some reason, when you have undiagnosed celiac disease, canker sores, it's a thing. And even in the years after this diagnosis, whenever I would get gluten, I would accidentally eat gluten, I would get a canker sore. So that's just my thing, apparently. So this diagnosis, I was so thankful for it, but it completely turned my life upside down. Here I had just bought a bunch of groceries to start my junior year of college, and now I had to throw it all away and learn a completely new style of eating, which was strictly avoiding gluten. So everything with gluten, completely off limits, and this was back in 2012. So gluten-free foods were not nearly as good or prevalent as they were today, and I was just so overwhelmed. Like, I remember trying to buy pasta, and it was like rice pasta, and it was all soggy and mushy, and trying to like eat bread, but there were holes in it, and I was like, what do I do now? And so grocery shopping took me twice as long because I had to read every ingredient label, Google every single thing I bought. And so I started out on my brand new gluten-free life, and I felt so much better overall. Like, all of the bloating, the heart palpitations, the fatigue, the weight loss, it all went away. And so besides a few slip-ups in the beginning, which is normal and understandable, I was strictly gluten-free and was so thankful to be able to get a quick diagnosis. So after that, my gut health remained pretty stable until a few years after college in the fall of 2014. And so this time, yet another digestive collapse, but this one would last a good 5 years and is really the reason why I'm here right now. And so with this one, it was really a perfect storm for just massive gut symptoms. I was newly married, starting a stressful corporate job, was on hormonal birth control, and while I was eating gluten-free, I definitely wasn't eating a healthy diet. My husband and I would make desserts every weekend. I just ate a lot of sugar and carbs and just didn't really know how to eat well. I also had to get on an antibiotic for UTI, so here we go, another antibiotic slipping into my story. And so I think the combination of all of that, the high sugar diet, the stress, the hormonal birth control, and the antibiotic just set off a giant cascade of dysfunction in my gut, and things started to really go downhill. So I remember my symptoms at the beginning were a lot of fatigue, brain fog after meals. Eating just didn't make me feel good. I also got really constipated, had a lot of undigested food in my stool, and started to notice things like onions, garlic, and apples really bothered me and made me feel really bad. So it was obvious that things just weren't working too well in there. So I spent a few months struggling with symptoms, going to GI doctors, and just being sent home with medications, recommendations to try things like the low FODMAP diet, which I had already been doing. And I specifically remember this one GI doctor thinking, I'm going to try somebody new. He's going to help me. He just told me, here, try this low FODMAP diet. And then he was going to give me a handout with some recommendations about foods to eat, foods to avoid. And I was so excited to get that handout because I had been Googling low FODMAP and had been, finding some things online, but was just confused about all the rules and all the things that I couldn't eat and like portion sizes. And it was just like really overwhelming for me. So I was like, yes, this doctor is going to give me a handout that will clear up all of that confusion. And no, it was literally the exact same graphic that I had printed out for my computer with the red and the yellow and the green foods. It was the same thing I already had. And I was like, such a letdown, and really like the start of my discontentment with conventional medicine and its ability to actually help me feel better. So eventually, a friend had recommended that I see a nutritionist who worked in her office, and that really opened up the world of alternative and functional medicine for me and showed me that there was potential help for my symptoms beyond just diet sheets, medications, and IBS diagnoses. If I never would have found that nutritionist, I don't know where I would be right now. So this nutritionist ran a functional stool test and then diagnosed me with SIBO from those test results, which back then I was thrilled to have an answer. and also very overwhelmed because this was my first foray into functional medicine, functional nutrition, and I had no idea what SIBO was and what any of that meant. And now, as a functional nutritionist myself, I look back at that and chuckle, unfortunately, because you can't diagnose SIBO from a stool test, which is another story for another episode, which I will definitely dive into, I'm sure. But all of that aside, I do believe her diagnosis of SIBO was correct. So after that first meeting, got my diagnosis, I got started ordering my SIBO treatment supplements, getting on that treatment protocol, and that nutritionist put me on an extremely restrictive low FODMAP plus SCD diet. So the SCD diet is the specific carbohydrate diet, and it's just a very restrictive, very healing diet, but looking back was the complete wrong thing for me to be focusing on. So she was very good intentioned, but unintentionally made me afraid of food. She recommended that I do things like make my own mayonnaise, which took so much time and stressed me out so much. And it was just absolutely not where I needed to be focusing. She wanted me to make my own bone broth, which took a lot of time. It tasted awful. I had to remember like trying to choke it down, and I'm like, this is supposed to be helping me. And she just had me cut out so many foods from my diet. So I got to a point where I was eating the same meals every single day and definitely not eating nearly enough food, which was just another huge stressor on my body that was already very stressed out. And so beyond the restrictive diet, that nutritionist also put me on a SIBO treatment protocol that I had a really difficult time tolerating. So it was just a very overwhelming, very difficult time. I had this new diagnosis, was eating like 5 foods, and couldn't make progress on the treatment protocol that was supposed to make me feel better. So after this point, things get a little fuzzy on my journey, but I remember bouncing from practitioner to practitioner, doing a lot of SIBO treatments and a lot of SIBO breath tests, and a lot of SIBO breath tests. And those breath tests, they always made me feel worse and feel like I had lost all of the progress that I had just gained with that previous treatment protocol. And I was just spending so much money on supplements and tests that really had me going in circles. And so somewhere along the way, I was able to start slowly expanding my diet past that heavy restriction. And I learned about and adopted more of a paleo diet. I started eating more food, more quality food, more real food, and more protein. And honestly, that change alone helped me feel so much better. I just think I was sick, right? And so I wasn't feeling well. I wasn't eating. I was just underfueling and undernourishing my body for so long that just finding the right approach with food and being able to eat more helped me so much. So I was definitely improving, but I was still dealing with all of the SIBO symptoms that I had been stuck with for years. And so eventually I started seeing a celiac specialist in Atlanta near where I lived. And she was such a kind person and so thankful for her. She helped me get antibiotic treatment for my SIBO. She was a functional doctor, so she could write prescriptions, all those things. And so I did a few rounds of Xifaxan, which is the main antibiotic for SIBO, along with allicin, which is the active component of garlic that helps to treat specifically methane SIBO. It wouldn't budge after rounds and rounds of herbal treatment. So I was like, all right, let me try these antibiotics. And again, over here, hemorrhaging money, trying to pay for this brand name prescription antibiotic, this expensive functional doctor. It was just a lot. But I do think that I was slowly making progress. I would have periods of feeling better, and then would just slip into a symptom flare and undo all of my progress. It was very frustrating, and maybe you can relate. And this is definitely another topic for another episode, but during this whole time of like symptom improvement, symptom flares, I was really diving deep into my faith as a Christian and trying to understand more about the role that my thoughts had in my life and how they impacted my actions and actually how I felt symptomatically. And man, this was one of the most impactful realizations of my life, and it really helped to transform my health. So I had always been the type of person that you could describe as type A, kind of anxious, needed to control all the things, know all the things. I would always try to rehearse every single scenario that may come up in my day-to-day relationships, things at work. I would like rehearse those over and over in my mind, trying to figure out all of the possible conversations from all of the possible angles and all the ways it could go so that I could be prepared to face anything. It was just how I was. And looking back, not a very beneficial place for me to be mentally. And so my huge realization with that was that this crazy spiraling and all of these worrisome, anxious thoughts were actually what was causing my symptoms to flare. So stress is powerful, and these thoughts and spirals and anxious thinking would significantly impact my gut health and cause my symptoms to flare. It wasn't what I was eating, it wasn't a treatment protocol, it wasn't a supplement I was taking, it was just my mind having control over my symptoms. And so once I was able to realize that, I could let a lot of my stress and anxieties go, turn them over to God, knowing that it wasn't me that had ultimate control over my life, but Him, that I truly did start to have fewer symptom flares, and I felt like I could make consistent progress in my healing. And so that was just huge for me and really just a step up in my healing journey. And then another huge turning point in my journey, and what was the beginning of the end, thankfully, was when I finally decided to take the complete antibiotic treatment for methane SIBO, which is Xifaxan, which I had already tried, and neomycin, which is just a traditional antibiotic, but that helps to target that methane producing bacteria. So I had avoided this combo for a while because I had read that neomycin was a very strong antibiotic with a lot of not so good side effects. But I was at the point, I don't even know how many years into this struggle, where I had tried everything else and I just didn't feel as good as I knew that I could. So I did the double antibiotic treatment and things definitely changed. So about halfway through that treatment, I remember just being so nauseous while eating, like couldn't finish my food. I had no appetite. It was just, I felt awful. And this was so different from the symptoms that I had had for years previously. So again, just super confused and just not sure how to manage these new symptoms, right? Before I was always like bloated, constipated, brain fog, didn't feel well. But now I was like nauseous, stomach pain, diarrhea, all of these new things that I was like just a complete 180 from where I had been before. But the good news was that I was able to now eat all of those high FODMAP foods that I had previously had to avoid for years. And I distinctly remember the first time I ate an apple, I cut it up and dipped it in peanut butter, and it was so good. I hadn't been able to eat an apple for years, and it was a huge win and a gigantic turning point for me in my healing. But I now had all of these new symptoms to deal with, so it was not over yet. I tried to manage these new symptoms like the nausea, the stomach pain, the heartburn, reflux, diarrhea on my own, but eventually I had to restrict my diet again, but it was a different type of restriction. I could now no longer eat like high-fat foods, citrus and tomato foods. They just all made me more nauseous. And I remember having to make a whole chicken in the Instant Pot and then literally take the chicken that I wanted to eat, rinse it off under the water so that I could remove as much fat from the chicken as possible so that I could actually eat it without it making me nauseous. So I just ate a lot of bland food like chicken, potatoes, bread, that kind of stuff. Eventually, all of that was not working well enough, so my nausea and diarrhea got so bad that I had to go to the ER. I was just so dehydrated. I couldn't eat much, and I just was not thriving. So I did feel better that day after they gave me some IV fluids, but again, I left with no real answers and a script for a PPI, which when they recommended that I take the PPI, I just told them flat out no. Like, I had literally just beat SIBO weeks before, and I had dealt with SIBO for long enough that I knew that suppressing my stomach acid with a PPI was the last thing that I wanted to do. I knew that without enough stomach acid, I was at high risk of bacteria being able to overgrow in my small intestine again, and I was like, no, we are not doing that again. But I had to give in, and I eventually ended up taking the PPI. I just couldn't function without it, and there was really nothing else that I could do. And so The PPI did help. I was able to eat more, my nausea and diarrhea calmed down, but I knew that staying on this PPI was not how I wanted to live my life. It wasn't going to be the most beneficial thing for me. I knew there was more than just staying on this as an answer. So I was determined to dig deeper, just like I had done with solving my SIBO. And so while I was working on trying to troubleshoot what was wrong with me, my health just kept declining. This time I started having heart palpitations again and just felt like any small stressor would tip me over the edge into like hyperventilating and needing to go sit in the bathroom by myself to calm down. And this made it really difficult for me to function at work. I constantly had to stop what I was doing and just go sit somewhere quiet so I could calm down and stop my heart from racing. So eventually, I made the difficult decision to take 3 months of unpaid leave from my job, which, while was one of the most helpful things I did for my health, it really put a strain on our finances and relationship. My husband and I, we wanted to buy a house soon, and with my unpredictable future at work, we just weren't sure if we were going to make it happen. But during those 3 months off work, I was able to find a new practitioner who was the last practitioner I would ever have to see, and I am so thankful for her. We still keep in touch today. She is just the sweetest and kindest and the best practitioner. And so she ran a GI map, which is a functional stool test, and we discovered that I now had H. pylori, along with some other bacterial imbalances, basically just a lot of stuff going on in my gut, which was likely a result of the imbalance caused by taking those antibiotics for SIBO. And so that H. pylori was what was driving all of my nausea, my heart palpitations, loss of appetite, diarrhea, and other crazy stomach symptoms that I just never had before. So we got started on an H. pylori protocol and addressed a bunch of other diet and lifestyle things that I needed to dial in. And I believe it took 2 rounds of herbal H. pylori treatment before I really started to feel better. And actually, it was about a week after finishing that last round of treatment that I got pregnant with my first baby. And so I really didn't do any retesting or follow-up since I was pregnant, but that discovery of H. pylori and treatment protocols were such a huge turning point for my health and my overall ability to just feel well again, feel like myself again. So much so that since then I have been feeling so good. I did have to do another round of H. pylori treatment after having my first baby, and that around that time was also when I decided to get my certification in functional diagnostic nutrition. And since then I have honestly been feeling the best I have ever felt, even before I got sick. I went on to have a second baby, and now 3 years postpartum with the 5 and the 3-year-old, I'm just so thankful, so grateful to be feeling amazing, like even way better than I ever felt before I got sick all of those years ago. And I really attribute that to doing all of the behind the scenes diet and lifestyle work, all of the things that I learned in my practitioner training to become an FDN-P, working with all of those practitioners, just gaining all of this functional health and knowledge. It all has truly transformed my life and my family's lives and my ability to maintain great health, even in the ups and downs of new motherhood and raising a young family. And now it is my mission in life to help others recover their health and feel well again for good, just like I am so grateful that I was able to do. And so that's my story. It kind of had a quick wrap up, but that's really what it was. It was just finding the right people, doing the right things, doing all of the behind the scenes diet, mindset, lifestyle work, and all of those puzzle pieces together, right place, right time, just really enabled me to find a lasting healing. And so that's ultimately why I'm here doing what I'm doing right now. I have been able to experience firsthand what it felt like to lose my health and then fight so hard to regain it. And I'm so thankful for my journey and everything I've been through, because it has made me better and healthier as a person. It has enabled me to make my family healthier than they ever would have been without those years of struggle. And it has given me the passion and fire to help others out there like you who are struggling with similar digestive issues where conventional doctors are just little to no help. And so I hope that helps give you a little backstory into me and why I do what I do. I can't wait to continue on this journey with you with this new podcast platform. We are going to be diving into all of the things, and I'm just so excited to share everything with you. So if you've gotten to the end of this episode, shoot me a DM on Instagram. Let me know how you liked it. Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast so other people can find it too. And I'm so excited to see you back here again next time. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Getting Well Again podcast. If you found today's conversation helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback really helps others who need this information find the show and start their own healing journey. And if you know someone who'd benefit, please feel free to share this episode with them too. See you next time.